All right, welcome back to part 2 of my presentation. This will center on the stream surveys we did in the Central Columbia County Stream Group in 2019. So just to orient ourselves as to the area we're talking about, we're back to this level 3 ecoregions map, and we can see right here on the convergence of the southeastern till plain / central corn belt plains with the driftless area lies this Central Columbia County area. And if you zoom in a little further, just on our southwest Wisconsin area here, you've got Columbia County up here in the northeast corner, and that 2019 stream study group kind of covers the heart of Columbia County from northeast to southwest. And blown up even further, we see this Central Columbia County sampling group. I call it that because it's a bit different than Bear Creek, which was kind of a nice, neat, discrete watershed. And this is actually 4 different watersheds, I guess you could say. You've got the Duck Creek or Middle Branch Duck Creek watershed up here with Jennings Creek, Middle Duck, and South Duck. You've got Rocky Run here. Then you've got this little sub-watershed, which is Hinkson Creek and Rowan Creek. And then you've got the Spring Creek watershed, which is the east branch of the Bowman Branch. And then the south branch, and then what is the main branch that drains out to Lake Wisconsin. Now, all of these sub-watersheds do drain over to the Wisconsin River. So in that sense, they're all in the same watershed, but slightly different than Bear Creek. Just taking a look at this a little differently with respect to the trout regulations. Most of the streams in the Columbia County Planning Group fall into that county base regulation, that 8-inch minimum length limit, 3 fish daily bag limit. And then there's one special regulation on a section of Spring Creek from Highway J down to Lake Wisconsin with a 12-inch minimum length limit and a 2 fish daily bag limit with artificial lures only. Just taking a look at public lands access in the planning group, we have standalone fishery areas associated with Spring Creek, Rowan Creek, Hinkson Creek, Rocky Run, and let's see, it's too small to see really, but this Relke Creek is a 40-acre fishery area on Relke Creek, which is also known as the South Branch of Duck Creek. There's also significant public land along Jennings Creek associated with Jennings Creek Wildlife Area. And that pretty much covers it. A little bit more about our 2019 sampling in this Columbia County group. So we had no stocking in 2018 or 2019. Again, so we can look at natural reproduction or young of year fish, and natural recruitment, which is fish that were produced the previous year that made it to age 1 in 2019. We had 30 sampling locations in this group, almost double what we had in the Bear Creek watershed across the 4 systems that I outlined earlier. The Duck Creek system, which had 7 sites on 3 streams, Rocky Run, which is 4 sites on 1 stream, the Rowan Creek system, which was 13 sites on 3 streams, and the Spring Creek system, which included 6 sites on 2 streams. Sampling took place from June 17th to August 20th. And again, each individual site, we tried to match the timing of the visit from previous years. And we wanted to, again, avoid sampling after rain events. And equipment, once again, based on stream size. Oops, and this was the slide. The text was a copy over from that bear presentation, so just disregard that. But by and large, this Columbia County group, the streams were a little bit larger in size, and by and large, these sites were sampled with the tow barge. There really was only a couple of backpack sites, one on Upper Rowan Creek, one on an unnamed tributary to Rowan Creek. And I think that pretty much is it for the backpack sites. So it's all barge sites basically. Again, just a word about trout stream classifications at the time of this evaluation in 2019. At that time, we had Upper Rowan Creek, South Branch Duck Creek. Those were the two Class 1 streams. The Class 2 streams were Lower Rowan Creek, Hinkson Creek, Spring Creek, Bowman Branch, or the East Branch of Spring Creek, Rocky Run, and Jennings Creek. And then we had one Class 3 stream, which was the Middle Branch of Duck Creek. And then there were some unclassified reaches that we took a look at. That would be the uppermost part of Rowan Creek, that's upstream of Goose Pond Road, and then the unnamed tributary to Rowan Creek that drains out of Pine Hollow on the western side of Poinette. And just a couple examples of the fine brown trout that we caught along the way. The one that I'm holding here on the left, that was collected in the Dick Ryan pasture out there at Spring Creek. And this one on the right that Alex is holding, that came from the South Branch of Duck Creek. Just a little bit of brown trout stocking history in the watershed. A number of streams had sizable small fingerling annual quotas. Rowan Creek, 5,000. Spring Creek, 6,000. Rocky Run, 6,100. Jennings Creek, 2,000. Middle Branch, Duck Creek, 2,150. But the small fingerling stocking in these streams ended in 2017, ahead of this evaluation. There were also some surplus adult broodstock quotas on the books. 50 brown trout annually into Rocky Run, and the 40 each into Rowan Creek and Spring Creek. And again, that's large adult fish that are the hatchery no longer needs, that are stocked out just to provide an additional quality angling opportunity. And so, where are the brown trout in the Columbia County streams? And you can kind of see here, Rowan Creek taken as a whole, as pretty good brown trout numbers. Again, here, these dashed lines are the statewide total brown trout catch rate median and the Southeast Wisconsin Till Plains total catch rate median. So that's the middle of the pack, so to speak, for brown trout abundance statewide and regionally. And you can see that Rowan Creek hits the mark far and away better than the middle of the pack. And really that's driven by Upper Rowan Creek, that Class 1 section. Lower Rowan Creek has lower trout abundances, but that's a product of a change in the habitat from the upper part of the creek to the lower part. In the upper part, you've got quite a bit more gradient, a lot more gravel and rock substrate, a lot better spawning habitat. You get down into the lower reaches and that gradient goes away. It's kind of flat and slow and cold and pure sand bottom. So you don't have as much natural reproduction down there. Unnamed tributary to Rowan Creek, despite the lack of stocking, showed a kind of a baseline brown trout population. Hinkson Creek, and this is driven more by kind of lower Hinkson Creek, closer to the convergence with Rowan Creek, actually has about 200 brown trout per mile on average. Spring Creek kind of falls right in that same category. The Bowman Branch averaged across two sites, had a brown trout total catch rate up over 700 per mile. Jennings Creek is back down around that 200 mark. Middle Duck, more like 100 per mile on average. South Branch Duck Creek, that other Class 1 stream that I mentioned, aka Rolke Creek, up over that 1,700 per mile mark, largely driven by tremendous natural reproduction, young of year trout. And then Rocky Run's down here at the bottom. That was, I think, less than 100 fish per mile, brown trout per mile on average. Now, if you split that out and go site by site, and with with that we've got Rowan Creek, all these sites labeled RC here, unnamed tributary to Rowan Creek, Hinkson Creek, Spring Creek, Bowman Branch, Jennings Creek, Middle Duck, South Duck, and Rocky Run. And for each of these streams, as you move from left to right on the graph, you're moving from higher in the watershed to lower in the watershed, or from headwaters to mouth, from left to right. So you can see that Rowan Creek is fair to good in the upper reaches. You get into the middle part of the stream, and you really hit the peak. You've got some sites up over 2,000 brown trout per mile, and then you hit the transition, this sharp contrast between upper Rowan Creek and lower Rowan Creek. These last two sites, these are down in that lower gradient sand bottom portion, and they just don't carry the numbers of trout because they just don't have the natural reproduction driving it down there. And so it goes, uppermost Hinkson Creek, no brown trout to speak of. It's all brook trout. You get into the middle and lower parts of the creek, and brown trout are much more prevalent. Spring Creek and the upper reaches, this site 62 right here is right where the creek kind of comes out of Lodi Marsh. And we've been seeing some issues with high temperatures and low dissolved oxygen up there. The numbers aren't real high in recent years. And then as you go downstream, all of these Spring Creek sites are downstream of the confluence with Bowman Branch, which is the east branch of Spring Creek that parallels Highway K and comes into Lodi from the east. Actually have quite a nice brown trout population out there, even in the absence of stocking. And that stream is ice cold, and it really brings the temperature of Spring Creek down. Jennings Creek, again, uppermost Jennings Creek, not a lot of brown trout up there. A few more as you get down lower in the watershed. Middle Branch Duck Creek, this is probably the most marginal, or tied for the most marginal in terms of temperature. Temperature requirements for trout. I know it trends a little warmer. Doesn't have a ton of natural reproduction driving. It has a little, but not real high abundance there. And then Rocky Run is here at the end, and that stream starts out as a warm water stream, and it really struggles to get cold enough to maintain, a significant trout population. A little bit of natural reproduction and recruitment here in the middle reaches, but so if we just strip away and look at one kind of age class at a time, and we say, where is the natural reproduction in these Columbia County streams? And far and away, the two best areas are upper Rowan Creek. Again, high gradient, a lot of rock and gravel substrate, really nice spawning habitat. And then the South Branch of Duck Creek, same reason. Good water quality, good gradient, good substrate, good spawning habitat. And then these other streams, some are a bit ahead of the median. The median's the statewide, and the regional catch rate medians for young of year trout. But it's really these two streams that are far and away the best. And consequently, those are already classified as Class 1 streams. So where are the fish recruiting to age 1 naturally? And again, upper Rowan Creek kind of runs away with the title there. Some of these other streams, or at least certain sites within these streams, are approaching the statewide median with respect to naturally produced age 1 fish. Again, these are the catch rate medians for Class 1 brown trout streams statewide, and then in the southeast Till Plains / Corn Belt Plains region. And again, you've got some poor performers down here. Rocky Run, Middle Duck, Jennings. These are the more marginal streams in terms of temperature and habitat. So, adult brown trout, and again, Rowan Creek runs away with the crown. In addition to having that great spawning and rearing habitat, It's got excellent habitat for holding adult trout. It's had sites on Upper Rowan Creek on the state land have had, some decent trout stream habitat improvement projects in the past. So good places for holding adults. One site, you're approaching 1,200 adults per mile, getting pretty dense there. Bowman Branch is another. You're ranging anywhere from 180 adults per mile on the low end up to about 700 per mile up here on the upper end. And then this smattering of fair to marginal streams. Lower Rowan Creek, again, just doesn't hold the numbers that Upper Rowan Creek does, and that gets back again to the natural reproduction thing. But Rowan Creek and Bowman Branch, far and away the two best streams for adult brown trout in Columbia County. Where are the large brown trout, the greater than 12-inch brown trout? Again, Upper Rowan Creek, you're ranging anywhere from 50 a mile on up to over 180 per mile over 12 inches. Lower Rowan Creek, the one thing it does have is good habitat for holding larger adult trout. Some nice deep stretches down there, undercut banks here and there, large woody debris in the stream. So it holds some pretty fair large adult trout. Bowman Branch, again, shows out well. Spring Creek, this is the one area where Spring Creek still shines a little bit. It still holds fair numbers of large trout. And the South Branch of Duck Creek actually holds a fair number of large trout as well. So the brown trout takeaway messages, for these Columbia County streams, Upper Rowan Creek and the South Branch of Duck Creek have the best natural reproduction by far. And that's driven by, water quality, temperature-wise, volume-wise, and the habitat within the stream. Good gradient, good rock and gravel substrate, decent rearing habitat. The entirety of Rowan Creek plus Bowman Branch and the South Branch of Duck Creek have the most adult brown trout, falling far above region and statewide median catch rates, and performing up there with good class 1 streams. Recruitment to age 1 is good in Upper Rowan Creek and fair to poor elsewhere. Our classification system, for how we define yearling trout may be flawed. I just don't think putting a bracket of 4 to 7.9 inches and saying that, those fish are all yearlings and, none have grown larger than that within a year. I think we miss a little bit there because streams that are ahead of the game, some of the, best in the state for young of year production and adult abundance, when you compare them, somehow fall short in yearlings. And, to get from a young of year to an adult, you have to be a yearling at some point. So I just not sure about that 4 to 7.9 inch classification for yearling brown trout. I think we're missing something there. And poorly performing streams are thermally marginal. The temperature of the stream runs higher, and indicative of that is the number of species that you encounter in the surveys is generally higher, and the IBI scores are lower. Just to give you some idea of what I'm talking about, my supervisor Dave here is holding 2 very nice largemouth bass that we picked up here in Spring Creek in the Dick Ryan pasture, and we've started to notice more encroachment of these cool water species further up into Spring Creek. Smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, walleye, and sauger specifically. And then, in places like Rocky Run and the Middle Branch at Duck Creek, we encounter a lot of forage minnow species. Species that like a little bit warmer water that you don't find in the coldest streams. And this graph helps illustrate that point as well. You'll see generally the streams with higher average brown trout catch rates are over here in this area where you're only encountering 3 or 4 or 5 species in a survey. This unnamed tributary to Rowan Creek is kind of the exception just because the stream is so small. But it is ice cold and home to just brook trout, brown trout, and sculpins. But as you move further to the right on the x-axis, and you see these mean brown trout catch rates start dropping off, and it coincides with more species encountered. This is the average number of species per sample site for these streams. Temperatures rising, it's becoming more marginal for trout, it's becoming more favorable for these warm water species, and you see fewer and fewer trout and more species diversity. South Branch of Duck Creek being one exception. It's close proximity to Middle Duck, which actually has a pretty high species diversity, and those fish persist in the South Branch of Duck, despite pretty cold water. And I'm just kind of going over those thermal scenarios. Rocky Run and Middle Branch of Duck Creek have some natural disadvantages. Both streams begin life as warm water systems at the headwaters. And Rocky Run, starts as a waterfowl impoundment on one of our wildlife areas, which is called Mud Lake. And then Duck Creek is a warm water drainage system. And these streams see some cold water input in the middle reaches, and that cold water input, from groundwater is just enough to lower that stream temperature and make those marginal trout streams. And the groundwater or cold tributaries, contribute to that groundwater in the case of Rocky Run, and the cold water coming out of the South Branch of Duck Creek in the case of Middle Duck. And the initial handicap of that warm water is hard to overcome. Human actions, things that we can do, habitat improvements, aren't likely to change that situation. Rocky Run, actually, the in-stream habitat is really nice. It's a really pretty stream. It looks like it should hold a lot more trout than it does, but that warm water is just hard to overcome. Spring Creek, on the other hand, it starts as this massive spring complex at the headwaters, starts out cold up in the Lodi Marsh, right? Well, in recent years, the stream where it comes out of that marsh and kind of in the vicinity of Riddle Road up there, the stream is warmer and warmer each time we visit, with lower oxygen exiting Lodi Marsh. Trout numbers in Upper Spring Creek are down. You've seen this warm water game fish encroachment kind of stream wide as the temperatures warm. You've got the cooling influence of the Bowman Branch that's cooling Spring Creek down and kind of keeping Spring Creek below that confluence, a trout stream. But Bowman Branch is the only thing saving it right now, to be honest with you. Recent aerial photos indicate the marsh is holding a lot of standing water. And we're going to be investigating the causes of that more in the near future. It seems that there's impounded water up there, or maybe there's just so much water on the landscape that it's, the marsh is full. You got a lot of organic material up there, in the bottom sediments, high biological oxygen demand as that organic material breaks down. That drives the O2 down. The impounding of the water warms it up, and as it comes out of the marsh, as a result, it's a lot warmer. So that's a handicap that the creek then has to overcome via groundwater inputs. So spent a bit of time on that, but it's important. There are reasons that the trout catch rates in these streams have dropped off in recent years, or like in the case of Middle Duck, have never been that high to begin with. And it's all thermally driven in my estimation. So what about the brook trout? We got some brook trout out there in Columbia County. A little word about brook trout stocking in Columbia County streams. There hasn't been a lot of it. Hankson Creek is the only standing fingerling quota for brook trout for about a 40-year time period. As of the last stocking in 2017, that quota was about 1,600 large fingerling brook trout annually. Some surplus adult brood stock fish that are culled from the hatchery get stocked into Bowman Branch and Rocky Run, just as another opportunity, quality angling opportunity. Excuse me, I'm going to get a drink here. And then Rowan Creek and Jennings Creek had a smattering of stockings of brook trout historically, but nothing since the 1980s in those two streams. So brook trout stocking in Columbia County been fairly limited, at least outside the Baraboo Hills. So, looking at the Central Columbia County group, where are the brook trout at? Short answer, you've got one stream kind of carrying the load here for the whole group, and that's Hinkson Creek. Excellent natural reproduction of brook trout, and pretty fair recruitment to age 1. Adult numbers maybe not so great, but up in its upper reaches, it's a fairly small stream, and it just doesn't have the capacity to hold a ton of large adult fish. The unnamed tributary to Rowan Creek on the west side of Poinette actually had a pretty fair brook trout population for such a tiny little stream. It's showing natural reproduction and recruitment. Keeping in mind that Rowan Creek itself is not stocked with brook trout. These are self-sustaining fish here in this little tributary. You got the Bowman Branch over here, one site, the uppermost site upstream of Mack Road. We found some brook trout back up in there, including young of year fish, which indicates natural reproduction. Jennings Creek, and this is driven mostly by the upstream-most Jennings Creek sample site. Some natural reproduction and recruitment of brook trout there, and some adults, despite not having been stocked since about 1985. So there's a low abundance, self-sustaining population there. Middle branch of Duck Creek, just too warm for brook trout. Nothing doing there. We did find one at the South Branch Duck Creek sample site, and none in Rocky Run. So Hinkson Creek is the one stream that competes well when you compare it against other Class 1 brook trout streams statewide and regionally. And again, if you split this out and just look at every site that we visited individually, we found just a couple of brook trout in Rowan Creek. There's your unnamed tributary to Rowan Creek again. Hinkson Creek, moving from uppermost part of the watershed to the lowermost part of the watershed. You see this gradient of decreasing brook trout. Best brook trout numbers, again, by far in the upper part of the watershed. Nothing doing in Spring Creek. Bowman Branch, over 100 trout per mile at that upper site. And I think we found one at the lower site. Jennings Creek, again, that uppermost sample location is kind of carrying the weight there. And then one brook trout found in South Branch Duck. Just looking at natural reproduction and recruitment, Hinkson Creek, once again, is the standout, performing well above, statewide and region median catch rates for young of year fish. And then you've got a few streams here that are kind of right around that middle of the pack, the unnamed tributary to Rowan, Bowman Branch, and Jennings, and then everything else is lagging behind. And again, some of these aren't brook trout streams. So that's to be expected. Recruitment to age 1, once again, Hinkson Creek carrying the load. I don't have data available for comparison for age 1 brook trout, 4 to 6.9 inches, slightly different categorization than brown trout, but I didn't have that data available for the statewide and for the region. So there's no comparison lines on there, but Hinkson Creek far and away carries the weight once again. Adult brook trout and large adult brook trout. Again, we see here Hinkson Creek is the standout. The unnamed tributary to Rowan Creek actually had a fair number of adult brook trout. Bowman Branch, Jennings Creek had a few, but falling behind, statewide and regional medians for Class 1 streams, and then just a handful of brook trout and adults in Upper Rowan. And Bowman Branch actually had the most larger brook trout. This is adult brook trout over 10 inches. That was the only stream where we found any. Um, those may have been surplus brood fish. Those fish, when they leave the hatchery, are supposed to have the adipose fin clipped, and none of these fish were showing fin clips. So either they didn't clip the fish for us, or these were just some really stellar trout that are hanging on up there in Bowman Branch. So, brook trout takeaway messages. Hinkson Creek has the highest age 0, age 1, and adult brook trout abundance of any stream in the group. It's better than region and statewide median values for Class 1 brook trout streams. The unnamed tributary to Rowan Creek, Bowman Branch, and Jennings Creek have small self-sustaining brook trout populations. These are at or below regional median and statewide median catch rate values for Class 1 streams. And these are cold streams that are either small or have marginal habitat. And in the case of Jennings Creek, it's is managed for brown trout, but yet these brook trout, still persist. They carry on. So more takeaway messages. Rowan Creek and South Branch Duck Creek have a few scattered brook trout individuals, but these streams are, they're cold. They have good habitat, but at the end of the day, they're managed for brown trout. And Central Columbia County streams, by and large, don't produce the large adult brook trout over 10 inches. And Bowman Branch was the only place where we have found any of those. Got some eye on some reclassifications following that 2019 evaluation. We have one stream that is going to move from unclassified to Class 1. I did the classification work this year on that stream. That's the unnamed tributary to Rowan Creek. The brook and brown trout catch rates together, especially for a stream of that size, stack up really well against other Class 1 streams. So that was a given. We have a stream moving from Class 3 to Class 2, and that was the middle branch of Duck Creek. It fits that Class 2 definition. It's got clear indications of natural reproduction, natural recruitment, and survival of fish from year to year. So it is not a Class 3 stream. It is a Class 2 stream. And then we have a couple of streams that are going to move from Class 2 to Class 1. And those include Hinkson Creek, based on the combination of brook and brown trout catch rates, and Bowman Branch. For the same reason. Those streams are comparing more than favorably with other Class 1 streams regionally and statewide, and there's no reason that they shouldn't move up in class. And just to give you a little point of reference here on this photo, this is Bowman Branch on the portion of Lodi Spring Creek Fishery area that's along Highway 60 on the east side of Lodi. This is looking downstream from the footbridge on Bowman Branch. Really nice little stream. Now, one caveat that we have in Columbia County that we didn't have in the other presentation for Bear Creek is these rainbow trout. We stock rainbow trout, age 1 rainbow trout that are harvestable size in our more heavily pressured streams in Columbia County. These are streams that get a lot of fishing pressure and have really good public access, specifically Rowan Creek and Spring Creek. And the rainbows are stocked, just as an additional harvest opportunity and to direct some of that harvest pressure away from the brown trout. And they're also stocked in some of the more marginal streams in the group, including Rocky Run and Middle Duck Creek. And that's, these streams have lower trout abundance, of other trout species, brook and brown trout, but still have pretty good public access. And in order to increase the catch rates and enhance the fishing experience, we stock these rainbow trout in these more marginal streams. And again, these rainbow trout are stocked in early April at 8 inches or larger. Quotas range from 650 to 1,800, depending on the stream. And we did a creel survey on these trout streams in 2018 and found that those rainbow trout actually have in the Columbia County streams a 62% utilization rate. I mean, 62% make it to the angler's creel in one form or another. Some are released and some are harvested, but the anglers are getting their hands on over 60% of those fish at some point during the fishing season. So really, really good data there. Rainbow trout are aggressive feeders with a less than a discerning palate. This is actually the gut content of a rainbow trout that I harvested from Rowan Creek this last spring. And it had eaten this entire caddisfly case here, along with the stick that the case was attached to, and the little larvae that lived inside the case was still inside the case, and this was in the lower intestine of the rainbow trout. So, it ate this and got basically zero nutritional benefit from it. Other rainbow trout stomachs I've opened up have had, been full of aquatic vegetation. So they're aggressive feeders. They eat a lot, but how much benefit they get from what they eat is open to interpretation. So where are the rainbow trout out there? And once again, Rowan Creek average rainbow trout catch rate is here, kind of just under that 35 fish per mile, with some sites approaching 90 fish per mile. Jennings Creek actually had the highest mean catch rate coming in at about 40 per mile. Middle Branch Duck Creek had the lowest, and then Rocky Run, South Duck, and Spring Creek kind of fall in between there. South Branch Duck is kind of curious because those are fish that are meant for the Middle Branch of Duck Creek that end up in the South Branch. Rainbow trout moving forward. They remain in streams throughout the summer. By the end of summer, those fish are up around that 12, 13-inch mark, which is pretty good. In some locations, we have up to 90 harvestable fish per mile in the summertime of these rainbow trout. It really do enhance the streams with low brown trout abundance. Rocky Run, Spring Creek, and Duck Creek puts more trout out there in the landscape for people to catch. Utilization is relatively high. And that creel report, that's in draft form. That's my supervisor Dave Rowe's report. So if anybody talks to Dave and they want to know more about the creel, give him a jingle about that. And we're going to continue stocking rainbow trout to provide a supplemental fishing and harvest opportunity, with the exception of Jennings Creek. Despite the fact that it showed the highest average catch rate of rainbow trout, the creel survey indicated that the utilization of those fish is the lowest compared to the rest of the streams in the group, especially nearby Duck Creek. So the fish are hanging around there, but they're not getting used in Jennings Creek. So other recommendations in the report on this sampling effort: we're going to retain current fishing regulations on all streams. We're going to discontinue all stocking in the South Branch of Duck Creek. We determined once we started digging into things that fish that were meant for Middle Branch Duck Creek were getting dropped in the South Branch, and that needs to stop. We're going to stock large fingerling brown trout instead of small fingerlings in the Middle Branch of Duck Creek and in Rocky Run. Those are those warmer, kind of more marginal streams with a higher species diversity overall, and these trout are having to escape predation by things like bullheads, creek chubs, and so forth. So stocking them at a larger size gives them a little bit of an advantage, in surviving the gauntlet, so to speak, from those piscivorous warm water species. We're going to stock large fingerling brook trout in Jennings Creek and discontinue the brown trout stocking. The temperature profile in Jennings Creek actually suggests that it's more suited to brook trout. It's a cold stream. It's just got some issues, with habitat degradation, due to some farming practices in the watershed. But the water volume and quality, temperature-wise, is very good. So we're going to actually move toward a brook trout stocking in Jennings and see what kind of change we can affect there. We're going to stock large fingerling brook trout in Rowan Creek and Spring Creek instead of small fingerlings. That's more just for ease of evaluation of natural reproduction. Those large fingerlings get stocked in the early fall after we've completed all our stream survey work for the year. So, if we're out there in June and July and August sampling and we run into, fingerling brown trout less than 4 inches, we know those are naturally produced fish. So that's kind of an ease of evaluation thing there. We're going to conduct trout potential sampling on South Branch of Hinkson Creek, as well as the upper part of Rowan Creek to support reclassification there, most likely to Class 1. And we're going to stock native strain large fingerling brook trout in Hinkson Creek in an attempt to displace the domestic strain population. I alluded to that in the Bear Creek report. Over a period of years, the brook trout that we were utilizing in our state hatchery system, we thought were wild native Wisconsin strain fish, but through genetic testing, we determined that by and large, the fish we were using as brood sources for our hatchery were not wild native Wisconsin strain fish. After all, they actually descended from fish that were brought here decades ago from the eastern United States, domestic strains like the Nashaway strain and I think one other one from New York. So a lot of genetic work has been done on brook trout in an effort to find those native brook trout genetics and shift our sources over for our hatchery fish to those native strains. So in order to displace the domestic strain population that had built up in Hinkson Creek, we're going to stock those native strain fish. And we're also going to team up with our water quality biologist to install monitoring equipment in Spring Creek and the Lodi Marsh to track temperature and dissolved oxygen levels through time and see if we can pin down a cause to the issues that we've got going on up there. Just some tidbits from our 2020 sampling that I've thrown in here at the end, kind of outside the scope of the group-wide survey from 2019. But just a word on South Branch Hinkson Creek, down 130 meters downstream of Highway 51, which actually is this Blue Star location right here, just on the northern outskirts of Poinette. We sampled that for the first time in 2020, and we actually found almost 700 brook trout per mile. Lots of natural reproduction, pretty decent recruitment to age 1, and then some adult fish as well. The stream does run a hair warm, but brook trout seem to be hanging on there pretty well. And that South Branch of Hinkson, that Blue Star is, not in the exact right location, but it drains kind of from southeast to northwest and it hits Hinkson Creek out here. What else? Oh, actually, I got that location wrong. It's actually this yellow dot here on this dash tributary. That's the South Branch of Hinkson. And then down here, let's see. The other tidbit is going to be the unnamed tributary to Rowan Creek that drains out of Pine Hollow from south to north. Here on the west side of Poinette, this red spot we sampled in the 2019 evaluation and 2020. And this yellow spot was a new sampling location in 2020. And you can see the results, our 2020 survey results here, that downstream location that we also sampled in 2019, again, continues to show a self-sustaining brook trout population. And then further upstream of Pine Hollow Road, which is south of Highway CS, west of Poinette, and here's a picture of it on the right-hand side here. It's actually a really pretty stream up there. Down here on the lower end, the stream is primarily sand bottom, and it's kind of flowing through a low wetland. But further up in the watershed, it's got pretty good gradient, really nice rock substrate. Not an overwhelming amount of flow, but enough to the point where, we had almost 450 brook trout per mile up there. And this is by and large young of year and yearling fish. So the more you look, the more you find. No one had ever surveyed the stream up in that Pine Hollow Road area before. So that was a really neat find. So just some Columbia County wrap up. Our next Central Columbia County evaluation is going to be in 2025. So as part of that, there'll be no stocking in 2024. So we can get another look at natural reproduction and recruitment. The Baraboo Hill streams, some of which fall in Columbia County, were evaluated in 2020, and that's going to continue in 2021 due to the work restrictions we had around, the COVID pandemic. We weren't able to complete our 3-person barge electrofishing sites, which really was only 2 sites in the Baraboo Hills group. But we're going to get out and sample those again next year. We didn't stock in the Baraboo Hills group in 2019 or 2020, and I deferred the 2021 stockings as well. So we can go finish our look at that stream group then. And we'll continue our evaluations of the south branch of Hinkson Creek and the unnamed tributary to Rowan Creek as we move forward. These streams are right in our backyard in Poinette, and there's no reason not to get out and gather the data on those streams to get them classified, especially south branch of Hinkson. And that's the end of the slideshow. Again, a big thanks to Pat Hasberg and Amy Klosmeyer for contributing all the pictures that they did. Thanks to Top Wells for expressing interest in having me do these presentations. Feel free to contact me. I should have included my contact info here at the end. I'll do that right now. It's nathan.nye@wisconsin.gov or 608-635-5143. And I'm happy to take any questions people have about either of these, watershed / stream groups. There's a lot of information that I didn't cover in this presentation just in the interest of time. So go ahead and probably email is the best way. And Toph or maybe some of the other folks might want to put out a solicitation to have people send in questions to them, and they can send them to me all in one bunch or something like that. But happy to talk about these streams anytime, and happy to continue getting out there on the landscape and surveying these streams in a kind of a systematic, structured fashion, and get the data that we need to make our management decisions. So thanks again. Just want to wish everyone a safe, happy, and healthy holiday season. And we'll see you out there on the streams. Happy fishing.